So we're on to the next step of the build, and this looks to be the tactile push button switches. Obviously this little bag. You can see by the layout there's 2 pins on each side. They can go in one of 2 ways, and honestly they're not polarized, so it doesn't matter. These typically kind of snap down in. We just load the board up. I will tack 1 pin on each, make sure they're all flush, and finish soldering. You know, in the previous assembly video I was talking about just how amazing things have become, where you can get cheap printed circuit boards made, and there's, you know, high availability of parts. And, you know, these little tactile push button switches are really inexpensive, even in small quantities. You know, it's just amazing how ubiquitous all of this has become, how easy it is to source, and the creativity it unleashes in people to be able to do, you know, true reproductions or functional reproductions like this is of stuff. Just kind of an amazing world to the younger generation out there watching this. It's truly amazing, and you probably don't really appreciate just what you've really got available. Something like this, when I was in my teens or 20s, would have been prohibitively expensive to do. It would have been hard to source, you know, the parts, etc. So, you know, just really fun to live in the era we do. So let me get the solder out here. I'm just going to hit 1 pin on each switch. Check them again to make sure they're flush. And finish soldering. Soldering pencil still set at 350 degrees C, my pretty typical operating temperature. The hotter you have the pencil, the higher the odds you're going to damage the component you're soldering or lift a trace on the PCB. At the same time, if you're too cold, you're going to get cold solder joints where it's not making good connection, where the solder didn't flow well, etc. So you know, everything's kind of a balance, as everything in life is. And for me, 350 C is a really good, comfortable soldering temperature. So looking down the row of pins, they all look flush. I don't see anybody standing up, poking out, or out of alignment. I'd say that's absolutely adequate. Whoops. I was actually going to solder this full row. And we'll flip the board around and hit the remaining pin on the other side. Learning to solder takes practice. This is, you know, as I think I said in the unboxing video, this is like a good board for somebody who has some solder practice to intermediate if you want to learn. The layout is very generous. These pads are very large. It's a pretty simple assembly. There's nothing really tricky here, which is really nice. If you're interested in odd vintage computers, something that you can display on a shelf or on a desk, this might be a really fun project. I got one more pin on each switch on this side to hit. Over the years, I have come across articles and photos and stuff of the original µKenbak computer. I always thought it was kind of an interesting architecture and kind of an odd looking machine, and that kind of, I don't even know how to describe the case, you know, a bit like a 70s era, you know, sci-fi spacecraft or something. That's just kind of an odd shape to it. I'm getting too far away from my eyes and losing focus with these glasses. So we have all the switches in place. Everybody's soldered. Kind of doing a visual inspection over the solder joints, and I've got a couple I don't like. If I can spot it again. Maybe it was just that one. Next is a bag of mixed assorted parts. This guy. So he's moving on to dip sockets next. Honestly, if I'd have been thinking ahead of time, I'd have done the dip sockets first. I prefer that assembly order. Again, not that it matters. I just kind of prefer the sockets first. Well, resistors are really first. I like working from the lowest profile component to the highest. So I can just set this hardware aside. Pull out the 4 sockets. Solder the dip sockets. Now, interesting, the dips go on the back of the PCB. Oh, that's a really good, turn the board over, it's not marked. Oh. I didn't realize this was silk screened on both sides. That's really interesting. So the load on this is on both sides of the board. You've got the switches and the LEDs, and of course you've got the sockets with the chips, which would be too tall on the back of the board. So that's something that I just realized, even though I had read the manual ahead of time. Very used to a single-sided load. And if I hadn't been paying attention, I may have well soldered these on the front of the PCB rather than on the back. So there's a notch in the socket down here. I don't know if you can see it in the video or not. There's a notch there in that end of the socket. On the PCB, there's a gap in that outline. Align the notch in the socket to the gap. That one's got a bent pin on it. Doesn't want to go in. Oh. Nemo's just realized I'm upstairs without him, and he's down there now starting to cry. I'm going to have to go get him and bring him up in a minute. Doesn't have to be in the same room with me, but he needs to be on the same floor with me. Which is okay. Aw, little buddy down there crying. In this case, I will use the blue painter's tape. You just kind of tack these in place so I can flip the board over. Those who have followed along with the saga of me and dogs, Nemo was another elderly adoption, 15 years old. I've had him since, I think, just towards the end of December. Did I swap glasses around? Good. He's had some health issues. I'm going to tack one pin in each corner of each socket. Then I will pick the board up, apply a bit of pressure to the socket on each corner, and just make sure the socket is down flush. And if you've watched other assembly videos, you've seen me do this before. Tape comes off. Get my finger on the socket and just make sure it's flush. Oh, Nemo down there crying. He wants to come up and be with Daddy. Said he's 15 years old. Got some health issues. He's actually got cancer. We're considering surgery. It's an adrenal tumor. He was just diagnosed this week with Cushing's. Haven't really totally determined a course forward. We can manage the Cushing's with medication, but that won't stop the growth of the tumor. At 15, surgery's pretty risky. For 15, he's actually generally pretty healthy. He had a blood clot in a lung recently and spent 5 days down at an emergency vet in an oxygen chamber until we got him back to where he could breathe on his own this last week. They did chest x-rays. His lungs have healed nicely, so he got through that just fine. He's a great little dog. But, you know, you adopt elderly dogs. They need homes too. Their health issues come along with them. The Humane Society he came from, of course, did a basic health check. But, you know, they didn't dig any deeper. They really can't afford to do those kind of deep diagnostics. Oh, buddy. Like, Daddy, I want to come upstairs be with you. I'd hope to sneak up here without him waking up, but that didn't happen. A great little dog. You know, over 2018, if you followed my videos, you heard Rosie coughing in the background. Rosie, I think I've mentioned in a couple previous videos, I had to put her down finally. The illness got too far along. I didn't want her to suffer. Oh, little buddy down there crying. No, he can hear me now. He's half deaf, half blind. He's got bad cataracts. He was given the crows out of my back deck this morning. The what for? Having a great old time out there. Yeah, I hear you down there. Don't know if that fly that just flew past my head was audible in the recording, but there's a big old fly in the lab here suddenly, which doesn't make me very happy. So back to where we were. Double-sided load on the board. Pay attention. If I'd have started with the sockets, almost guaranteed I'd have mounted them on the wrong side of the board. Although the silk screen on the board indicates really which side the components go on. So it's just a matter of paying attention. You may see what I did. I missed an entire row of pins on an IC. Again, why you go back and do visual inspection. Aww. Making nice progress on the board here. I'm going to do a quick look across all these solder joints, looking for missed ones or bridges. As I said before, the layout is very generous. Easy to work. It's just a little bit of a flux between the pins. It looked a little reflective. There is actually a solder flake there that came off the tip of the pencil. Not really happy with that. What is... Okay, that cleaned off. It was glued down with the flux. Well, nice progress. Notches in the sockets are all to the indicated notches in the silkscreen. Nice little step forward. I'll end this piece of the build here, and we'll pick up in the next video.